My writing is very closely linked to one part of that career, which is my time in MI5. So I thought I'd tell you a bit about that and try and show you how the books have emerged from that, and particularly how Liz Carlyle, my heroine that runs through all my novels so far, and I hope will continue to run through them, how she emerged really out of my career. And just to set the scene with Liz Carlyle, she is, as you've heard, a sort of mid-30s MI5 officer. And she is intelligent and feisty. She's the sort of person who likes to get to the bottom of her problems. She is intuitive and quite tough. And of all the things that she does not like being patronised by men. And I wonder where that came from. Shall we say that I was once such a person, but I didn't actually always say the things that I allow Liz Carlyle to say. When I joined MI5 by being tapped on the shoulder, as you'd heard, I'd just read Kipling's Kim, because we'd just come back from a rather exciting journey that we'd made, driving from New Delhi through Pakistan, over the Khyber Pass to Kabul in Afghanistan. And I'd read Kipling's Kim in advance of that, because it covers that sort of area. And it's not the kind of journey, of course, that you could do now. So I joined MI5 with my head full of Kipling's Kim and not knowing very much at all, other than that, about it, because nobody did know about British intelligence in those days. It was all a deep, dark secret. So I thought this is going to be full of spies, and of course it was really, because in those days, India, particularly Delhi, was one of the forefronts of the Cold War. It was where East met West. And the place was full of spies from both sides of the divide in the Cold War. So there were KGB officers and East European intelligence officers and Australian intelligence officers and British intelligence officers. And our job in the MI5 headquarters was to try and find out who the spies from the other side were and try and negate their activities. And that's what we were doing. And then when we came home at the end of my husband's posting, I applied for a full-time job in MI5, and that's how my career started. And Liz, of course, is kind of modelled on that, but Liz is a modern MI5 officer, so she doesn't have to wait to be tapped on the shoulder. She can look on the website, which now exists, and see what jobs are available and apply for an application form online, and that's what Liz Carlyle did. There's another difference between me and Liz Carlyle, because when I joined MI5 at its London headquarters, I found to my disappointment, and we're talking now about the early 1970s, that the place was male-dominated. They were definitely running a two-tier system. There were careers for men and careers for women, and never the twain could meet. The men did the sharp-end intelligence gathering work, and the women's job was to sit at the desk and deal with the papers, really. We were, collating the papers, filing the papers. If they thought we were quite bright, we were allowed to do a bit of intelligence assessment. But the one thing we could not do was go out on the streets and deal with the human sources who, even in today's technological world, still provide the best intelligence. And that's how it was until, as the 70s wore on, we women, and many of us were well-educated, exactly the same background as the men, we women decided that we were not prepared to put up with this anymore. So we mounted what was in effect a quiet revolution and said, why can't we do the sharp-end work just like the men? And our bosses of those days had to scratch their heads to think of an answer, because there wasn't one. Because if you think about it, some of the skills you need to deal with human beings who are often in difficult and dangerous situations requires just those skills that we talk about nowadays as the female skills: warmth, empathy, the ability to encourage and bring people along, an understanding of people, and a certain degree of ruthlessness, which I think is also a female quality. So that was my beginning, and I was actually the first woman to be allowed to go on the training course that existed in those days to teach us the skills we needed to deal with these human sources. But it was geared entirely for men, because it was about going into a pub and using some kind of cover story about who you were and what you were doing, trying to find out as much as you could about anybody in the pub. And we're talking here about the mid-1970s. I was given my pub, very sleazy dump near Victoria Station in London, went in there, surveyed the pub full of men in dirty macks leaning on the bar, drinking pints, went up and chatted up one of these guys, who was very surprised by this approach from a seemingly respectable lady, and clearly thought I was something other than a seemingly respectable lady. And so that was the beginning of my career as what we call an agent runner. It all got better after that because I was able to choose the venues where I met my agents. However, Liz works in a very different MI5 because she's modern, and nowadays women are doing all the services work, including the human source, dealing with human sources, and that's what Liz does. She is an agent runner, as we call it. The other thing that Liz has in common, actually, which comes out of working in a secret organisation, is certain difficulties with her private life. And it's about working out how you can match a private life with a secret organisation in which you can't talk about what you do. And that is still difficult to this day because nobody except the Director General, the heads of all our intelligence services, is publicly named, and the others still have cover stories about what they do, because you can't be an undercover officer if everybody knows who you work for. So there are still problems. I mean, all of you would take for granted a situation where your neighbours invited you to their Christmas drinks party. If you're us, you have to think, well, I know the first thing anybody's going to say when I get in the door is, what do you do? What am I going to say? So you work out some cover story for the evening, and you try to make yourself extremely boring, which is not what young people actually want to do. So I remember on one occasion I said I bought boots for the army, which is, that's quite a put-off, I can tell you. And on another occasion I said that I did PR for a cosmetics company, but unfortunately on that occasion I met somebody who actually did do that. And that was a bit of a problem. So Liz still has this problem, and she never, although she has various kind of relationships, shall we say, with men, she never actually manages to have any particularly satisfactory one. And Liz, in fact, nurtures a great penchant for her boss, Charles Weatherby. Her boss is married, but his wife is terminally ill. And I'm working towards killing her off, and therefore leaving the field open for Liz to either develop this relationship or not. And as I've been going around Australia, various people have said to me, Liz should dump Charles and get a life. So other people have said, oh, you ought to get her married and give her a baby. But I'm thinking about all these things, and I don't think I'm going to give Liz Carlyle a baby, because I had enough trouble in my own life, actually, because I had 2 small children when I was working at the sharp end, and that was complicated, I can tell you. And there were many occasions when my working life and my family life came up against each other. And there was one I remember in particular when there was a tube strike in London, and I'd got 2 daughters who were at school at different ends of the town. The nanny, well, I think it was an au pair actually, was going to go and pick up one, what to do with the other, because I had a meeting with a source in a safe house that I couldn't cancel. So what happened was I gave my daughter the key to the safe house. I said to her, this is where it is, now go there, open the door, go upstairs, do your homework in the bedroom. And then I came along, I met my source, we had our meeting downstairs, and then I went upstairs, scooped up my daughter, we locked up, and off we went home. And that was one of her more bizarre experiences as a young schoolgirl. And now and again, now she's in her 30s and a mother of 2, we talk about this and laugh about these sort of episodes that gave them, I think, a pretty strange childhood, but they say it helped them grow up more quickly than some of their friends. So there are other characters apart from Charles Weatherby whom I have introduced into my books, whom I've actually met. There is Geoffrey Fane of MI6, who is a typical, in my mind, typical MI6 officer, very beautifully dressed with a pinstripe suit and a military tie. And he actually also has a bit of a penchant for Liz Carlyle. So I get great pleasure out of these characters and keeping them in the books, moving on and hopefully developing them and developing their characteristics. They are all characters I've met in one shape or form. The plots of my books come from keeping a very sharp eye on what's going on in the world, and particularly in the world that the intelligence services have to deal with, and then adding to them my own experience of how things are actually done. I joined, as I've said, at the height of the Cold War, and in those days the intelligence services of the Soviet Union and their former allies were represented in all Western capitals in large numbers, and our job was to try and find out what was going on, what were they doing, or indeed who were the intelligence officers out of this massive sort of diplomats and journalists and bankers and things from the Soviet Union who were floating around in London at the time. And it really was a bit like a John le Carré novel in those days, because people were leaving packets of money in hollow trees on Hampstead Heath in return for piles of secret documents. And our job, as I say, find out what's going on, try and get rid of these intelligence officers by getting them expelled and prosecute their British sources. And that is what I worked on for the early part of my career. The first job I did, actually, was to try and find out whether there were any hangovers of the Cambridge spies, Burgess, Philby and Maclean, Anthony Blunt and John Cairncross, who by then we knew about, but were there other people who'd been recruited at university in the late 20s, 30s, who might by then be in senior positions in the British public service. So we were still looking and analysing what had gone on in those days. In the end, we abandoned that investigation because we decided that if there were such people, they would now be so old, retiring even, that it probably, if they'd done damage, it was done, and there wasn't much more you could do about it. So we abandoned that investigation, but I drew on my experience of that when I was writing Secret Asset, which is the book about a mole put into MI5 by the IRA. So bringing it up to date, I'd changed the KGB for the IRA. But the way you investigate moles within an intelligence service is the same as the way we did then. So I've given Liz Carlisle sort of copycat role, really, except that she's doing the up-to-date work. The other book, I think, that's come out of my experiences in the counter-espionage area is Illegal Action. And this is the book about a Russian oligarch in London. And again, I read that there were as many Russian intelligence officers in London now as there were at the height of the Cold War. So I thought to myself, what on earth are they all doing? And one of the things I thought they would be doing is taking a close interest in the oligarchs, these very rich Russians who made billions when Yeltsin privatized the state industries, and many of whom are now living in London. So I created a plot where the old KGB, the modern Russian intelligence service, had formulated a plot to get one of these people who was criticizing the government of Putin. And I was writing this book when, lo and behold, Alexander Litvinenko was murdered, presumably by his former colleagues, putting polonium in his tea in a London hotel. And I thought, my goodness, fiction is ahead of fact. I've got there first, I said. But if I had formulated, I think, a plot where somebody had poured polonium in somebody's tea in a hotel, none of you would have believed it. You'd have said, this is absolutely bizarre. So mine is, slightly more straightforward plot. But as I say, I think I got there first.